Well, it's finally happened. I'm super fucking canceled. I'm the most canceled you can be. Canceled by the king and the supreme head of the church. The ultimate cancel culture. Cancellation from on high. My head is about to be canceled from my shoulders. I'm in danger. I mean, we knew this was gonna happen sooner or later. I just can't seem to shut my whore mouth, even when the stakes are so very, very high. So here I am, imprisoned in the Tower of London with nothing to do but sit and wonder, will it hurt? I mean, of course, I'm super fucking privileged, and the king sent for a French swordsman to do the deed, which is in every way preferable to some incompetent jackoff with a blunt axe. And of course, I have but a little neck, so it will for sure be the work of a moment. But will it hurt? Well, there's anecdotal evidence and scientific research to suggest the answer may be yes. It's well known that beheading by an inexperienced axeman can be an excruciatingly painful, drawn-out death. Mary, Queen of Scots' executioner missed her neck, striking her first in the back of the head, only killing her on the second strike. Witnesses reported hearing her mutter, "Sweet Jesus," after the axe lodged itself into her skull. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was only declared dead after 11 strikes of the axe. I will, of course, be put to death by an expert swordsman with a sharpened blade, but even then, a humane end is not guaranteed. Loss of blood, and by extension, consciousness, usually occurs before a head is fully severed when using an axe. But with clean methods of decapitation, there is some evidence that a person can retain consciousness and even experience fear and pain for up to a half a minute after beheading. The guillotine, invented and popularized for its presumed humanity, brought with it many tales of heads casting about their eyes and trying to move their lips after execution, and even some grimacing or grinding their teeth in apparent pain after being poked in the spinal column by the executioner. Gotta love that gallows humor. When Charlotte Corday was executed by guillotine in 1793, the executioner allegedly lifted her head and slapped her face. According to witnesses, Corday's cheeks flushed, and her facial expression displayed the unequivocal marks of indignation. And if you're wondering right now how it is that I know about events that take place years, even centuries after my death, the answer is, of course, shut the fuck up and enjoy the YouTube video. I'm near death. I'm close to the veil. Maybe it gives you arrival powers or something. This is canon now, and we can move on. A 2011 study in the Netherlands that sought to determine if decapitation, a common form of euthanasia for lab rats, is humane, found that the brains of decapitated rats produced electrical activity between the 13 and 100 Hz frequency band, which is associated with consciousness and cognition, for a period of about 4 seconds. But the most infamous study of apparent cognition after decapitation was recorded by a Dr. Boreal in the Archives d'Anthropologie Criminelle in 1905, following the execution of a convict named Languille.
Here, then, is what I was able to note immediately after the decapitation. The eyelids and lips of the guillotined man worked in irregularly rhythmic contractions for about 5 or 6 seconds. I waited for several seconds. The spasmodic movements ceased, the face relaxed, the lids half closed on the eyeballs, leaving only the white of the conjunctiva visible, exactly as in the dying whom we have occasion to see every day in the exercise of our profession, or as in those just dead. It was then that I called in a strong, sharp voice, "Languille?" I saw the eyelids slowly lift up without any spasmodic contractions. Next, Languille's eyes very definitely fixed themselves on mine, and the pupils focused themselves. After several seconds, the eyelids closed again, slowly and evenly, and the head took on the same appearance as it had before I called out. It was at that point that I called out again, and once more, without any spasm, slowly the eyelids lifted, and undeniably living eyes fixed themselves on mine with perhaps even more penetration than the first time. Then there was a further closing of the eyelids, but now less complete. I attempted the effect of a third call. There was no further movement, and the eyes took on the glazed look which they have in the dead. I have just recounted to you with rigorous exactness what I was able to observe. The whole thing had lasted 25 to 30 seconds.
I mean, of course, there are just as many anecdotal examples of heads not responding to stimuli after removal from the body. And there are plenty of scientists who believe that the sudden loss in blood pressure would cause instant unconsciousness, if not immediate death. But there's enough doubt, enough lack of consensus that decapitation cannot be said for certain to be the humane method of capital punishment civilized societies would like to believe it is. And I understand that there are some people who don't care about the humanity of the death penalty, or even believe that those convicted of capital offenses deserve to suffer. I mean, we don't hang, draw, and quarter someone because it's quick and painless. But, you know, the people we hang, draw, and quarter aren't really people. They're commoners. And I think even the most blood-horny sadist would, at least on paper, claim that in a just society, queens and noblemen who are executed by the state should be afforded the most painless and dignified death possible. The death penalty isn't supposed to be cruel. When my legal system ends a human life, it's gonna be only the most rational, the most logical, the most classically liberal homicide. So if it's not decapitation, what is the most efficient, humane method of killing a person? A bullet to the brain is quick and likely painless, but it's kind of gauche and there tends to be a lot of cleanup.
Oh, Christ.
With hanging, sometimes...
His neck did not break!
And...
Now we must watch him strangled to death.
The electric chair and gas chambers have likewise fallen out of favor because of their uncomfortably high botch rates. And because, well, you know. And in the United States, even lethal injection, until very recently thought to be a completely painless and humane method of sending a convicted criminal off into that good night, has been criticized as a procedure that actually causes an incredible amount of pain and suffering. Its apparent peacefulness actually being a result of full-body paralysis, during which the convicted can still experience consciousness and pain. Oh, and it also has one of the highest botch rates of any form of execution because it's usually not performed by medical professionals. They tend to shy away from killing healthy people on account of that whole Hippocratic Oath thing. So perhaps there really isn't a reliable method of ending a healthy person's life that is efficient, foolproof, and humane. Perhaps with any execution, there is an inherent risk that the person being put to death will experience anywhere from a few seconds to a few hours worth of fear and pain. And while we're here, while it's just us girls in the Tower of London waiting to die, maybe we might consider that the very institution of capital punishment is bad. Fucking yikes. Well, that's curtains for Weston, Norris, Brereton, Smeaton, and my brother. It looked like they were straight up not having a good time. There was so much blood by the time it was poor little Mark Smeaton's turn, he nearly slipped right off of the scaffold. To make matters worse, they're all completely innocent of the crime they just lost their heads for. I mean, I don't know, maybe some of them did some other crimes at some point that might have warranted the death penalty, but treason by way of sex with the Queen? No, like, I'm already condemned to die, so I have no reason to lie on this. For God's sake, one of them is my brother. I mean, like, I get why it's a rumor. George is a little snack. Everyone in my family is. Look at me, look at this face. And I'm the one who needed to develop a personality. It's hard being a 7 from a family of 10s, but don't you worry your little heads about us. Luke Hemsworth and I are thriving. Or at least, I was, before being condemned to die for crimes I didn't commit. And that's one of the primary arguments against the death penalty, isn't it? What if you got the wrong guy? What if the person you just executed is innocent? If an innocent person is condemned to life in prison and they are found to be innocent, they can be released. we cannot bring an innocent person back from the dead. This is why the moderate, rational proponents of legally ending a person's one true human life argue that limiting the death penalty to only the most extreme crimes like rape and murder, and only in cases when one can be absolutely positive of their guilt, like where there is a confession or deoxyribonucleic acid evidence. Not all convictions that carry death sentences are made on the basis of DNA evidence. In fact, very often they are not. Sometimes investigators feel like they have a strong enough case even without DNA. Or sometimes the police investigating a case are sloppy or lazy or have an incentive not to collect or even to plant DNA. A handful of cops, as it turns out, like to do a bit of the odd murder themselves. But even if capital punishment was limited to cases in which there is DNA connecting a person to a case, DNA is not a smoking gun. In 2014, a silk shawl owned by Catherine Eddowes, one of Jack the Ripper's victims, was tested for mitochondrial DNA. The shawl contained bloodstains and possibly semen. The DNA collected matched ancestors of Eddowes as well as ancestors of Aaron Kosminski, a Polish man who was one of the original suspects in the Whitechapel murders. So we got him, right? The Jack the Ripper. DNA evidence confirmed Aaron Kosminski came on her shawl and stabbed her. Maybe not in that order, but he was with her and her bloody shawl that night. Well, not necessarily. Mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down from mother to child, doesn't really reveal who a suspect is. It can only rule one out. A suspect can share mitochondrial DNA with thousands of other people. Additionally, even if we could find a 100% or near 100% match with Kosminski's DNA and the semen, does that prove that he was the man who murdered Eddowes in 1888? Well, I think it would prove that he lived in Whitechapel and used the services of sex workers in 1888, but that doesn't make him a murderer. Additionally, even with modern samples, DNA analysis is often more of an art than a science. A 2016 reevaluation in the case of JonBenet Ramsey, of all people, indicated that samples taken from her pajamas and underwear, previously thought to be that of an unknown male, were likely composite samples of many different people's DNA. This was evidence used to exonerate, not convict, but it illustrates the weaknesses in some forensic cases. And confessions are even less reliable. Other YouTubers have referenced the Timothy Evans case, in which a Welsh man made several contradictory confessions to killing his wife and child and was put to death by the state, only for investigators to find out 3 years after the fact that the murderer was actually a serial killer named John Christie, who went on to kill 4 more women after Timothy Evans was executed in his stead. The Evans case, like the case of the Central Park Five, the Stephen Downing case, and the West Memphis Three that would follow in the decades to come, was an example of coerced confession. Investigators placed suspects in psychological and sometimes physical distress over long periods of time and sometimes teased the idea of lesser sentences as bargaining chips in order to induce a confession, whether or not the confession is true. I mean, Mark Smeaton confessed to sleeping with me because he couldn't take a little light torture, the weasel. And I assure you, we did not. I'm not his type. So as the state, as the realm, you have this choice between a process where putting someone to death involves a long, protracted appeals process at great financial cost, a far greater cost than lifetime imprisonment, and often at great emotional cost to the families of the victim and the perpetrator over the course of many years in order to limit the number of innocent people being put to death. And you still wind up with a significant enough number of innocent people being put to death to warrant the Innocence Project being a thing. Or you have a system like we have here in Tudor England, where you just accept that a few innocent heads are gonna roll, and the next one might be yours. And then the discussion becomes, which crimes even merit a death sentence? I think most people would say murder. An eye for an eye, a life for a life. It's very clean, very symmetrical. The victim, after all, doesn't get to keep their life, one argues. So why should the perpetrator keep theirs? But do we mean all murders should be issued the same punishment? Are Ted Bundy and a woman who shoots her abusive partner deserving of the same fate? maybe it's just the Ted Bundys of the world, the most sadistic, unequivocally evil killers who deserve to die. And maybe they really do. Maybe we can all agree that they really deserve to die. Maybe that is a kind of justice. And maybe 2 or 3 or 5 more women disappeared between the period of 1974 and 1978, and the families they left behind will never receive a sense of closure because the only man who knows their final resting places is dead. Sometimes justice isn't only about what the murderer deserves. So maybe we need to keep the serial killers imprisoned for life in case they fess up about accomplices or make any late-life confessions that end up solving cold cases. But what about crimes against humanity? What about people who participate in genocides? What about the fucking Nazis? Well, I can't say I feel too bad for those who were hanged as a result of the Nuremberg trials, but it is an interesting mental exercise to pick apart why it is that I feel a dictator or a war criminal or someone who participated at some higher level in committing atrocities should die. Because it feels good. It's certainly not because I think the death penalty will deter war crimes. No, it just appeals to that dark part of me that wants to inflict pain on those that I see as deserving. And I have to face that part of me that is okay with a society that will kill a person just because it feels good. As Nicholas Frank, the son of Hans Frank, the infamous Butcher of Poland, put it,
I oppose capital punishment, but I am happy that my father got to experience the fear of death that he himself had inflicted upon so many innocent people.
For my part, I will be executed for adultery, an act of treason when your husband is the leader of your country and final arbiter of all your laws. Maybe in the liberal hellscape of the 21st century where SJWs run rampant, adultery won't be considered a capital offense or, even a crime. But in the here and now, we have old-fashioned values, okay? So I have nothing to do for the next several hours but sit here and wonder. Will it hurt? Will I be afraid? Is there a heaven, or will I simply cease to exist? I am not a nice person. Maybe not even a good person, but I don't deserve to die. I think on some level everyone has the right to be an utter piece of shit in every conceivable way and still have the right to draw breath and hear music and witness the unceasing beauty of a fucking sunset. Ugh! This whole experience has got me writing poetry and musing on the sanctity of human life. Gross. I can see it now. My final moments. I take in this last juncture of human experience. My heart, this old traitorous organ, flutters and beats against its cage. Be still. I inhale. The air is cool and damp. We are far enough away from the river that its sour funk can't quite reach. I smell earth and straw. I am recalled of a distant memory of an afternoon spent by a sun-dappled stream. There was a boy. I've forgotten his name. I teased him terribly and he ran home crying. My mind lingers there with the crying boy and the sunshine and the newts and the rocks. I will it back. Will my eyes to see. It is a pity that the last images they will translate are that of a gray sky and gray walls and gray unfriendly faces. But they do their work with special care. The verdant spill of the grass, the patch of lichen on that stone, the downward curl of this man's lip. I didn't fall in love with my child right away. I thought at first that something must be wrong with me, that I was cold, incapable of love. The moment came weeks later, but it came. Her eyes focused on mine, and I knew. Where is she now? I almost fail to notice that I can hear the whistling of a distant bird, the clearing of a throat, the whipping of a piece of fabric, a banner or a skirt, against the breeze. I glance upward and back. Perhaps someone is just raising a flag or preparing to fire a cannon. A royal envoy is about to rush out onto the green with word that my sentence is to be transported, that I am to be imprisoned again, exiled, that my murder will be stayed. Nothing. Nothing. Just above the curling wisp of a half-formed cloud. Nothing. Nothing. My audience shifts and sighs on the green. I have always been very funny, and I understand the importance of comedic timing. I've waited and baited long enough, and somewhere behind me, a shoeless Frenchman is waiting to deliver the final punchline. No one is coming. I won't have the last laugh, but at least someone is laughing. My eyes look their last as I lift the blindfold to my face and am shrouded in darkness.